I would like to welcome you all to the final event of the People's United Center for Women in Business's three-part Women of Color Professional Development Series. And this is a webinar on leadership with Dr. Ann L. Taylor. We are so thankful for everyone's presence here as we close out this professional development series, and we hope for your support of more of the center's events in the future. I want to take the opportunity to thank our collaborators for this event, the members of the Frank H. Netter, MD School of Medicine community, including the Inclusion and Diversity Council, the Association of Women in Surgery, the American Medical Women's Association, Student National Medical Association, and the Latino Medical Student Association. For those who don't know me, my name is Denisha Collins, and I work for the Institute for Global Public Health in the School of Medicine at Quinnipiac, serving both the undergraduate global public health minor students as well as the global public and community health concentration students in the School of Medicine. I'm honored to also serve as a member of both the steering committee for the People's United Center for Women in Business and the Frank H. Netter, MD School of Medicine Inclusion and Diversity Council. My service on the Women of Color Professional Development Series Committee as liaison between both organizations has allowed for the collaboration with and participation by some of our amazing medical students and their student-run organizations in order to bring this event to fruition. To that end, I want to also take the opportunity to formally thank two dynamic student leaders and medical students. The first student is Tiana Palm, a medical student representative on the Netter Inclusion and Diversity Council, for all of her hard work coordinating the student moderators for this event and ensuring that we had a strong student-centered voice present throughout this webinar. And the second student is Kelsey Lasorda for stepping up to moderate our chat and Q&A for tonight's event. Now, without further ado, I will hand things over to our team of phenomenal student moderators, Sarah La Roseliere and Michelle Apari, who will introduce our esteemed guest and get things started. Thank you again, everyone, and we hope you benefit from tonight's webinar on leadership.
Thank you, Denisha, for that warm welcome. And thank you so much, Dr. Ann L. Taylor, for being here with us today. We really do appreciate your time. So without further ado, I'm just going to quickly read Dr. Ann Taylor's bio. It's very rich and extensive, and she has a lot of leadership roles over the years. So Dr. Ann L. Taylor received her medical degree from the University of Chicago's Pritzker School of Medicine and completed her clinical and research training at the University of Chicago, Johns Hopkins Hospital, and the University of Iowa. She has held faculty positions at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, at Case Western Reserve University as Chief of Cardiology at the Cleveland Veterans Affairs Medical Center, the University of Minnesota Medical School as Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs and Co-Director of the Deborah E. Powell National Center of Excellence in Women's Health. As Senior Vice President for Faculty Affairs and Career Development for CUIMC, Dr. Taylor supports faculty recruitment, appointment and promotion processes, professional development and conflict of interest programs for faculty and trainees at the 4 health science schools at the Columbia University Urban Medical Center. Dr. Taylor's key initiatives include the reorganization of faculty academic tracks, the launch of the Virginia Nealand Friends Society for women faculty at the Vagelos College of Physicians and Surgeons, management of conflict of interest, appointment promotion processes, and implementation of mentoring programs, and as co-chair of the CUIMC Task Force on Anti-Racism in Health and Healthcare. Recently, the work of Dr. Taylor and her team on gender equity won an NIH prize for enhancing faculty gender diversity in biomedical and behavioral science. And in 2021, Dr. Taylor was awarded the Group on Women in Medicine and Science Individual Leadership Award from the Association of American Medical Colleges. She's currently the PI of the Columbia University VP&S COVID-19 Fund to retain clinical scientists. an award from the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation and its partner, the American Heart Association. And I just want to quickly add that Dr. Ann Taylor is also a cellist, which is amazing. So without further ado, we're going to get ready and get into the questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Taylor, for being here. So I will be starting us off with some questions. So the first question that we have is, how have your experiences outside of academia shaped your ambitions as a physician, professor, and leader?
Well, first of all, let me thank all of you for inviting me and for your very, very kind introductions. It's kind of interesting. I've never been a person that actually likes to talk about myself, but somehow or other, when you talk about your experiences and think about how you got, and I'm old enough to have been there and gotten here, it's actually very, I think it's very interesting. It helps you to understand what things have brought you to a particular place, but also to be able to share sort of strategies and to share how decisions are made and how goals are set. So if you ask me about my experiences outside of academia, I think I would start with my family life. So my parents were born in the South and immigrated, or I shouldn't say immigrated, but migrated to the North for better opportunities. They both each had high school education, but with many of the restrictions for Blacks in the South, they really felt strong. And they came separately. They actually met in New York. But both had a degree of educational curiosity and self-taught, self-teaching. So although both only had high school educations, my mother was very, very well read, and she was the musician in the family and taught all of us. She was our very first reading teacher and our very first piano teacher. And I'd have to add, a very scary disciplinarian. My father was the easier person. He was a much more easygoing, happy person. But he, for my sister and I, was actually the very first feminist in our lives. Now, he would laugh out loud if he heard me say that. But he was a father who thought his girls could do anything they wanted in this world, and he would make sure to clear the path for them. And there was no difference between my brothers and my sister. And that included doing chores at home. We weren't little princesses, but we did have this very strong supportive presence. And I always laugh when I think of playing the cello when I was younger. My father was always, so when are you going to play for Lenny Bernstein? And I'd always say, Pop, I'm okay, but I don't think I'm ever going to play for Lenny Bernstein. But he was the person who believed in us. And I think that was truly a gift. But he was not the only, my parents were not the only people that believed in me. And so I think you gather strength from, even though you can also gather a certain negativity, what sustains and helps you to grow is the believing in you and the strength and supportiveness. So I actually had a cello teacher who was very similarly always believed in me, always was supportive. So I think that those are some of the things that help me to grow strong. I do think having been held accountable for doing my schoolwork, for practicing, for doing those other things, also was very strengthening. I don't ever remember my parents punishing us to do our schoolwork, but they really made a big deal about doing well and made a big deal about it when we did well. So those were some of what I would call my formative experiences. And I think from my father, I inherited a sense of adventure. And so I really wanted to go to college. And when I was in college, I was sort of a dilettante. I liked lots of different things and learned different things from each sort of area. So I really loved language and was very good at French literature, and I loved music, and I liked the life sciences. So by the time I finished, I really couldn't make up my mind what I wanted to do. So I went to music school for a couple of years and then decided, no, I was not going to play for Leonard Bernstein. And I didn't even like doing that all the time. And that's what I liked, the life sciences. And I had had a job in an immunology lab. And so, sort of almost not at a whim, but the thought was, well, I don't want to be a musician. Maybe I'll go to medical school. But it was never a heavy or weighted decision. But that really was truly transformative. I really found the place that I felt like I did want to do every day, all day long, and have been very happy in my career since.
Thank you so much, Dr. Taylor, for sharing this experience. I think that's a great transition into our next question. So what motivated you to become involved in medicine, especially science and similar subjects, but separately, what continued to motivate you now?
Yes. So as I said, when I was in college, I always loved school, and I loved learning lots of different things. So I loved language, I loved music, I liked theater, I liked biology, I liked physics, strangely. I did not like chemistry. So I was kind of undifferentiated. I could have done lots of different things. Um, so actually what motivated me to go to medical school is the realization that I really didn't want to be a freelance musician. I think the pivotal experience, I was playing backup strings in a terrible bar, backing up a terrible band in a horrible neighborhood in the South Bronx. And I said, got to do something different. And so because I like biological sciences, I thought about, well, should I get a PhD or should I go to medical school? And my father said, a lot of PhDs driving cabs. You think about going to medical school, you'll always have a job. And so I have to say it was not a weighty, thought out decision. But once I landed, I realized I loved the biological sciences. I really liked them more than I realized. And we had patient-related experiences in our first year of medical school. And I thought I would go and really be captured by the science and enjoy that. But I also enjoyed the patient care aspect. And so uh, sometimes if you're good at a lot of different things, it's hard to tell a priori where you should land. But when you land in that right place, it feels right. It just absolutely feels right. And I have lots of friends who are musicians who have exactly the same experience with music. They say, if I couldn't do this, I wouldn't do anything. And that's a reason to stay doing something else. And I felt like that. I don't think I feel quite that I wouldn't do anything, but I really felt medicine was where I landed. Everything about it was interesting. And I've never lost interest. I've continued seeing patients, even though I still do. I do now mostly administrative work. But it's all, whether you're primarily an educator or a researcher or someone who takes care of patients, all those things are what make good patient care possible. And I think that's what continues to motivate me.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Now, knowing that medical school is like a tough journey, do you mind sharing the challenges that you faced throughout your professional journey and how did you overcome them?
No, not at all. I think, so I've always been I would say, adventurous person. I always thought I wanted to have a life with adventures in it, even that I didn't know what the adventures were, but I said, sort of having a predetermined groove wasn't the thing that I would do. I like trying different things. So I think in medicine for women, there were a lot of challenges. There remain challenges. Things have gotten better. I think for people of color in medicine, similarly, many, many challenges. In my class at the University of Chicago, we had 116 students in the class. Only 16 were women and only 6 were students of color. So that whole landscape has changed tremendously. But it was, it's very challenging to not see yourself in your surroundings. I did develop friends. I have friends, lifelong friends from medical school. Um, but the environment was not always supportive, not always non-biased, and required, I think, for me, a reserve of strength about my own, what I wanted to do and my ability to do it. And I think I drew that strength actually from my family. So I never had this sense of that some people have, of imposter syndrome. And I think it is a very, very stealthy thing that happens to people based on their surroundings. And I think in a way, my father particularly sort of inoculated my two siblings and myself. But that kind of surrounding where you're always the lonely only is very, very challenging. And it can be very lonely. But I always felt I wanted to have adventures. I always felt I can figure it out. And I think I had the support and the encouragement from my family to just go do it. Don't accept the view that others may have of you. You form your own view of yourself and hold to your values and your North Star. And I do think it's harder to do for women and it's harder to do for people of color, but it's really important to do, to feel yourself to be authentic and a person of value, a person of judgment, and a person with something to offer the world.
Thank you so much for your powerful words. I think you actually touched upon my next question, but I'll ask it anyway. What advice would you give to those of us who are having similar experiences?
Yeah, again, I think you find kinship and support. I do think that identifying people for whom you can be your most authentic and open self, who can support you in your view of the world and support you and encourage you. And sometimes it's in your family, but there's family who are chosen, not born. So I have lifelong friends that I've shared experience with, and we've shared mutual support. But I think that's just so important. Uh, it is, my sister and I are actually very close, and she's the other person who's my reality check. So no matter how the world kicks me around, she will either tell me it's going to be better, or when I need to be kicked around, she will do that too. So look always for those kind of what I call family relationships, whether they're born to or chosen. Um, and some of it comes from being able to give that too, to be open to support others. Um, there are lots of gratifications about your career and about what you do, but the other big thing that makes life worth living are loving relationships, family, friends, what you do for your patients, how you care. Those kind of interpersonal relationships are just so sustaining. And it's very easy to forget them. It's very easy when you get really, really busy with work to not do those things, but they are ultimately, they're just as essential as your work.
Thank you so much, Dr. Taylor, for sharing your words of wisdom and advice with us so far. With all your leadership roles and basically helping to advocate for minorities in leadership, what progress have you noticed in terms of addressing and eliminating inequities within the American healthcare system? And what do we still have to do or work on?
So we have an enormous work ahead.
Mm.
Um, and I'm going to trust you guys to take care of that when I'm long gone. It's we have made progress. There's no question about that. But we have seen, and certainly the pandemic exposed the ongoing inequities in care, in the ability to survive and to live. Um, And so we have to look both at the social determinants of health. We have all of these powerful tools now with genetics and genomics, and there's no question that genetics and genomics have an influence on your health. But we have not conquered the most straightforward and probably the most influential factors are the social factors. What are our environments like? How are we treated in healthcare? What are the expectations about our lifestyle, our ability to do the right things? Do we have environments that are healthy? So if you look at where toxic waste dumps are, at where there's problems with water supply, food deserts, it is in neighborhoods of color. And these things have a lasting impact. We can't ignore the stresses of racism on all people of color. We've seen it during these last 2 years emerge with not only our Latin population at the borders, our Asian American populations, Black and Hispanic populations. We've seen a resurgence of the. But what we've also seen in this time is a broader anti-racism coalition. And so we just have to keep working at that. I always felt, since I'm old enough to remember the civil rights movement, that would be the end of inequities in this country, and there'd be sort of a new paradigm, if you will, that it would all go away. The stories that my parents told me about living in the South would no longer be a factor, but this has persisted. It's gotten better, but there's still much more work to do.
Yes, absolutely. We still have work to do. And thank you so much for handing off the baton to us, the upcoming generation. And we'll definitely follow in your footsteps to make.
I'm counting on you.
So next question is, Dr. Taylor, did you have a mentor when starting to pursue your chosen field in medicine? And if you did have a mentor, how important has it been throughout your career to have them?
So that's a great question. And I have to say, I have had a long interest in mentorship and effective ways, strategies to mentor. And before I moved to Columbia, a colleague and I at the University of Minnesota actually co-authored a book on mentoring for faculty success. I think the most important thing to remember about mentors is that there isn't one mentor for you who's going to catalyze your whole career. You need many mentors. So some will be people who can guide you on the best path for whatever you choose to do clinically or scientifically or educationally. There will be other mentors who form your support network, who are at your stage of development or just a little bit above, who are going through. They may share some demographic aspects so that you form relationships that allow you to support one another. There are other mentors who sort of come along and teach you one or two very important things and then don't enter your life again. And then there are other people who provide you with special opportunities, sponsors that are kind of one-off. So being invited to give a talk at a very important meeting by someone, you may never see that person again, but that can be pivotal exposure. So I think it's important to know what it is you want to do, to have active questions about your pathway, and to try and figure out who can answer those questions, but recognize that one person is not going to answer all of those questions. You learn a lot from people who are just on the path ahead of you, a short distance. You learn from very senior people. You learn from people at your stage. And people learn from you too. It's really a collaborative network of people who support one another, share information, and cheer one another on.
Yes, absolutely. I agree 100%. That mentorship, you can find mentorship in anyone that you can connect with
Right.
who values your success.
And I want to say one other thing about mentorship too. Sometimes life lessons come in unusual forms. So when I was in college, I had a wonderful cello teacher, and I was playing a piece that was very advanced and very hard. And it had one section that was just terrifying to me. I played it for him, and I actually played it correctly, but you could hear the fear. That's the only, and so he made me kept playing it because I think he thought that by making me do it, I would be less afraid. But each time I had to do it, I was more terrified. So by the end, it was just a disaster. And finally, he stopped me and he said to me, you know, I'm not like most men. I believe that women can be fantastic cellists and do anything else in life. He said, but to be good at anything in life, as well as playing the cello well, you have to play with courage. And I thought he was talking about that particular piece of music, but that's really a life lesson. You have to have the courage to be adventurous, to sometimes take a risk, and to not be afraid, or actually be able to move forward while you are afraid. So that was that's a lesson that has stuck with me throughout my life. And it wasn't just about the Dvorak concerto either, which is what I thought it was about at the time, but it stayed in my mind because it was so important.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that, Dr. Taylor. I'm happy that you had such a great mentor from being a cellist and he believed in you. And, it's now stuck with you for the rest of your life. So
It
that's
did.
so next question is, what qualities do you look for in colleagues, friends, mentors, and mentees?
So I think passion for what you're doing, integrity about what you do, benevolence in interacting with other people, even people with whom you disagree. If you can do it in a way that's benevolent and constructive, you may change them somewhat and they may change you. We had this wonderful program offered by our School of Social Work. It was an anti-racism institute, and it was phenomenal program that was part of the scholarship of a young woman tenure track faculty, in which you were put in settings with a very mixed group and you had to talk about race and racism, how it related to you. And so in that group, there were people who'd been never experienced, there were other people who had terrible experiences, but it meant allowing yourself to be vulnerable to share those things. And at the end, we were all asked to identify what we were going to do about racism. And I think what came to me is that I felt that no matter where someone was starting, what their concepts were, that if I had the opportunity to engage in a civilized discussion, that I would do that, no matter where they were starting, to try and um, open these communications in a way that doesn't turn into the horrible debacles that we see. And I think that's very important. I've had colleagues that I really disagreed with about many different things, but if you can engage in civilized conversation about it, and respectful conversation, I can live with that.
Absolutely. I love that approach. Even when you disagree with someone, speaking with them, and even you can find out that you connect with them in some way or shape.
Right, right.
So that's amazing. Thank you.
But keep your self-respect intact. Other people's opinions that are based on demographics or language or any of these things about us that generate these instant biases, you define yourself, but you can engage with people more broadly.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. If any of the participants have any question that they would like to ask Dr. Taylor, you can just put them in the chat. So the next question we have, Dr. Taylor, as fresh medical student, I feel like the hard things that we have to learn is how to balance. So how did you balance leadership in medicine with being a practicing clinician and with your personal life?
Well, the first thing you learn is there is no balance. It's just, how do you manage to do a little bit of each and keep those things going on? So we had a chair, one of the first woman chairs, department chairs at Columbia, was an anesthesiologist who said, there are three things in life that matter: your career, your family, and those interests that provide you with sort of that regeneration and refresh your soul. She said, but the one thing is, you can only ever have at any given time two of those three. And so you have to focus on what's important at the time. At certain periods in your life, when my daughter was young, there was no cello playing. It was work and my daughter. As she got older, then there was time for the cello and work, and she had her own independent life. So I think the balance is to make sure that you stay self-aware about what needs to happen at any given time, and recognize that, you know, at some point you have to give up certain things, but you can return to them at later times. But you do have to be mindful about your own emotional self regeneration and making sure that you um, fill the needs of those people, family and friends and children, people that you love. That's a very positive thing for you. It helps us all when we do those things, when we engage in those. It's nice when they're reciprocated, but it's also just good for us to have that generosity and love in life. Um, but on a day-to-day basis, one day it may be one thing and the next day it's another thing, or one day this hour is devoted to family and this hour is devoted to working. Um, I I like to get up early in the morning. I'm a very early morning person. My daughter is a night owl, and she was even when she was a young child. So my way of dealing with getting my academic work done was when I would pick her up from daycare, we'd have dinner together, we'd spend some time together, and then when I put her to bed, I would go to sleep, but I would get up at 3:30 or 4, and I'd have to shake her out of bed around 7:30 or 8 to get her to school in time. But those hours from 3:30 or 4 till when I had to get her up were some of my most productive times. So you find a way. But it's all good. It's all good. It's all hectic, and there are days when you feel like you just don't have a spare minute, but it's all good.
Yeah, it's definitely hectic. So the next question that I want to ask you, Dr. Taylor, is, are there times when you feel overwhelmed because you stand for all Black women in the space you are in? And then to follow up with that question, can you tell us about that time and how you navigated those feelings?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Um, I wouldn't say I have felt overwhelmed, but lonely at times, often being the only person of color, or many, many times being the only woman in the room. Um, Having to be more assertive because you're just not seen or heard. Um, Having to be sure that I have the courage to speak up when things happen. In that setting, when you're the lonely only, sometimes you don't feel empowered to speak up. But I also think you ultimately have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, did I do what was right? Did I say what was right? And so I don't think overwhelmed, but often lonely, and sometimes angry. But again, you have to be self-aware enough to know what has generated that feeling and how you can sort of still function and set that feeling aside. You can't go through life feeling that way, but you do have to acknowledge when you have those feelings, and you have to take care of yourself when you have those feelings.
Thank you so much, Dr. Taylor, for sharing your experience. As a Black woman, I always feel, always asking myself when is the right time to speak up. So thank you for sharing.
Right, right. No, it is a challenge, um, but it's important to stand up for the right things.
I,
Um,
I agree 100%. So for my next question, how do you feel that working with professionals both in and outside of your field has helped you in your career? And then to finish up with that question, were there times when that collaboration has hurt you or hindered your advancement?
Wait, so it was working. Can you repeat the beginning of the question?
Sure. How do you feel that working collaboratively with professionals both in and outside of your field has helped you in your career?
Yeah, so working collaboratively is really, it's a pleasure. And each person in the there had to be some ground rules for collaboration. So it is mutually supportive. People are bringing different skills or gifts to the collaboration, and they should be acknowledged for what they bring to the collaboration, what's uniquely there. It should not be exploitative. And I have seen and experienced collaborations where uh, all of the credit was taken, my contributions were not acknowledged. And I just refuse to do that now. I mean, early on, you find yourself in those situations and you say, is this really happening? Am I overreacting? But it is important to always assess whether or not this is a collaboration based on equality, on equity, and on shared um, uh, um, uh, reward for what the work is. But collaborating with people who do different things really can often enrich your efforts. You each bring something different to the field and some other skill. But collaborations can be, if they're not honest, benevolent, supportive, based in equity and respect, they can be very damaging.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. The next question is, throughout your career, what is the most profound or impactful cultural shift or change you have noticed regarding leadership opportunities or the lack thereof for women in general and for women of color specifically in your field?
Right. So for women in general, I think I told you my medical school class of 116 had 16 women. Now 49% of our faculty are women. And we at Columbia have been very, very focused on gender equity as well as other forms of equity, but extremely focused. And so we review searches for leadership positions to make sure candidates are balanced with respect to gender, race, ethnicity. We track the diversity of honors that are conferred. We track who gets promoted. We actually completely reorganized our academic tracks in a way that it really empowered everyone to understand what was required for promotion. There's a mandatory annual review for all junior faculty. And so all of those things combine to shedding the light, letting the sunshine in on these processes. And so women are advancing much, much more than in previous years. They're being promoted to high ranks. We have almost 20% of our department chairs are women, which could use still more improvement. 30% of division directors, 30% are vice chairs are women. Women are receiving endowed professorships at about 44% of them, which is proportionate to the number of women on the faculty. So we have tracked that. We look at everything with an equity lens. And where there is a lack of equity, we have to think about very intentionally, first of all, why that's the case, and secondly, how we can change that dynamic. So I'm actually very proud of Columbia. They've done very well with gender equity. We have much, much more work to do with equity with respect to faculty from groups underrepresented in medicine. But we have in the last 2 years really turned our attention to this and are making progress.
Right. I'm happy to hear that we're progressing forward.
We are.
Yeah,
It's
hopefully we'll be.
oftentimes 3 steps forward, a couple of steps back, then more forward. I think the COVID pandemic was I mean, it was a terrible event for many, many reasons. But for women, it was very damaging to women's careers because all of a sudden, not only were women having to assume responsibility for childcare, and they did much more out of proportion to men, but also for the education of children. When schools closed, it was just almost impossible to get academic work done during the day because you're supervising your children at school, which was in the home, as well as managing and trying to keep them safe and healthy. And more of that burden, there's a ton of data in the literature that shows that more of that burden fell on women. Faculty of color also had many more burdens, or more often caring for extended families, much more likely to have COVID infections early on within the family. And so I think that the pandemic really exposed how vulnerable women's career advances were, how fragile. Um, and we're thinking now how to make sure that we create an environment that is supportive of women faculty and supportive of faculty of color. Otherwise, people will leave academic medicine. They will, and we've already had faculty. I've had at least one very talented mid-level faculty member just say, you know, the pandemic was the final straw. I can't do all of this and care for my family too. And I'm afraid we're going to see more of that. So I'm not sure what the right answer is, but we're all kind of making sure that we take a very close look at what happens to our faculty.
Right. Thank you. Those are very tough situations
Yes.
with their families, and and the next question, Dr. Taylor, is what is one motivational mantra, piece of advice, or phrase that a colleague, a mentor or mentee, family member, or close friend has shared with you that you remind yourself of consistently? And I know you shared in the beginning your mentor, who was your cellist
Right.
mentor. But do you have any other ones that you want to share with us?
Oh, I have lots of them, but I think if you ask me, what's the last thing, that it's to act with courage, to have the courage to act. That really was, at the time, I had no idea how profoundly important that was. I've learned from, I mean, I've learned things all my life. I enjoy learning new things from many different people, but I think that and my father's faith in my ability to always find a way, to always solve the problem, I think are the two things that are, if you were to ask me what keeps me going, I always figure, even when things are terrible, it's like, well, I just got to figure this out. It's my favorite expression.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think the theme here is courage, and also people who care about you, believe in you, and believe
Yes.
in your success. So the next question, Dr. Taylor, is who is the most inspiring female professional you have ever worked with? That's big. And how has this person shaped your approach to leadership in your field?
So that's a great question. And Dr. Vivian Penn is one of my absolute personal heroes. And I don't know if you would have heard of Dr. Penn because she's probably in her 80s now. But she was the first Black woman and the first Black student at the University of Virginia, and graduated. Now, I want to say if she's in her 80s, that would have been probably in the 50s, very early 60s. Graduated top of her class, trained in pathology, was chair of pathology at Howard University, then became the director of the National Institute of Health's Office of Research in Women's Health, and did that for about 15 years and was an absolute dynamo as an advocate for research into women's health, making sure the women's health workforce was sound, just all over it, and was an incredible speaker, a very sort of a firecracker, totally exuberant, totally self-confident, very, very funny, and very, very brash. It was a great combination. And she always was such a great example for me. So I have a photo of her when I was at the University of Minnesota. They had this lecture series where a faculty member was selected who could invite whomever she or he wanted to as a featured speaker. And I invited Vivian Pinn. And there's this great photo of us. And Vivian is sitting there with her arms in the air, waving and talking and laughing. And I was sitting there quietly, sort of soaking it all up. So I would say for women who are inspirational, Vivian was right up there. And you can Google her. She's just amazing. President of the National Medical Association, never was reserved about speaking her mind, and managed to do it in such a way that most people just didn't have an answer for her. There was no comeback once she'd spoken her mind. She was like this whirlwind that came in and just took up all the oxygen in the room and then flew out to the next room, but absolutely wonderful.
Wow, that's amazing. She sounds like a wonderful person. And just as she was your inspiration, you're definitely an inspiration to all of us as well. So thank you.
That is very kind of you. I hope people can profit from hearing my experiences, and that it's strengthening to, to be benevolent, to be kind, to have integrity, to have values, to have courage, and to treat yourself well. To have Vivian's spirit of total self-confidence. That's what I wish for all of you.
I think now it's our turn to soak in all your amazing experiences and words of wisdom. So thank you. So the next question we have for you, Dr. Taylor, is, have you ever struggled with bringing the most authentic version of yourself to your workplace?
Yes. So I think we all do. For so many years, because I was also a cardiologist, which is a profession or a subspecialty in which there were very few women. There are more women now, but still fewer women than in other specialties, and also very few people of color. And that's one of those situations you often feel isolated, even if you have a leadership role. And I did. I was chief of cardiology at the VA. There were challenges I felt aimed at me, which would not have been aimed at a man of majority background. And so in those circumstances, you can sometimes feel inhibited, feel you have to be more careful about what you say and what you do. And that you have to be aware of sort of always looking over your shoulder. That's not a great way to live. It's not my favorite way, but those were important leadership opportunities. And so you just do what you have to do well in that role and to learn from that role. But those are circumstances where you really don't feel like you're fully yourself.
Thank you so much, Dr. Taylor. I think I'll ask one more question. Any advice for those of us who want to continue to motivate the younger generation of women in STEM, but are simply stuck?
So I think you have to ask yourself, what does stuck mean, and how did you get stuck? And how do you find your way out of that? Are you stuck because the goals you've set for yourself are things you're really not passionate about? Are you stuck because it's an environment that's not supportive and maybe you just need to be at a different institution or a different specialty? So I think figuring that out is very important. But it's also important for people to know that careers and life doesn't just proceed always in a straight line, that you come up to periods where you get stopped, you get stuck, you get um, diverted. And it isn't so much that that happens, but how you find the way out of that to continue to grow. And that's something, finding the way out of it is very instructional for those um, who are coming up behind you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Taylor, for sharing that. I think one last question to like wrap up everything. Is there one question that you wish that we had asked you, but we did not?
No, you guys were very thorough, very thorough. But I think it's been a good conversation. And what I hope everyone takes away from this is both to continue to identify those things that you're passionate about and to not let things stand in the way of your work being your passionate, but that you don't ignore the other parts of life, that you keep family, friends, loved ones, and other interests. Those are the things that life is all about.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor.
Mhm.
Thank you.
So we have a few minutes now for Q&A. I'm going to be moderating, so if anybody has any specific questions for Dr. Taylor, please feel free to put them in the chat and I will relay them. And Dr. Taylor, thank you so much for your impactful words so far. This has been a great conversation. I'm excited
Oh,
to
you're
continue
welcome.
it. So we have one question in the chat right now. For those of us who are students attending, do you have any advice for us on seeking out good mentors?
Yes. So I think mentorship should be a collaborative kind of relationship. And so if you're looking for mentors, make sure you clarify in your mind what questions you have for this person. Is it about how you succeed, how you improve your clinical or research? Is it how to choose the way forward for your specialty and for your other? But it's not helpful if you say to someone, would you be my mentor? So what is it you need to know about? And then be very proactive. Ask people, look around you, see who seems to be doing the kinds of things you think you'd like to do, and talk to them. Ask how they found that pathway. What have been the challenges? Most people, if your questions are well organized and focused, are interested in doing that. I mean, in academic medicine, a big part of what we do is education. And so don't be shy about asking for advice and asking for specific insights into specific questions. Sometimes people will say, I'm too busy, go away. That's not your problem. That's theirs. And so you just let that flow off your back and move on. It shouldn't be a judgment about you. But make sure that you've formulated the questions and the things that you want to know.
Thank you. That's very useful advice for us, those of us students. The next question that we had, going back to some of the conversation earlier, do you have any strategies of being heard in a meeting, especially when your voice is not the one being heard in those situations where you're the lonely only, as you put it?
Yeah, so we call this the silent woman phenomenon. That you're at a meeting and it's all men and you say something and no one reacts to it, and the guy next to you says it. They say, "Oh, Joe, that was a great idea. So glad you brought that up." And when the first time that happens to you, you sit there steaming and you say, "I said that. How come they didn't say anything?" But then the next time it happened, I turned to the guy who said that and I said, "Thank you so much for advocating for my position. As I said, and I'd like to build on that still a little bit farther. Take it back." If your voice is not heard, don't let don't let that scare you into remaining silent. Let it goad you into being very noisy, being very participative, and making sure that when you make contributions, if someone else makes the same statements or offers that same and they are credited, you aren't, don't be shy about saying, I'm glad you agree with me. It doesn't inhibit the conversation. It may actually help build on whatever the ideas were, but it also means you're standing up for yourself. And that does wonders for your self-esteem.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. The next question that we had, you've clearly done a lot of traveling throughout your career, you know, Chicago, Minnesota, Cleveland, now New York City. Do you have any tips for us on adapting to new environments and new, and I'm sure varied academic cultures?
Yeah, so I think careers are built in several ways. There are some people who come to an institution, they spend their entire 50-year career, they retire and get a watch and a chair. And there are other people like me who actually get a little bit bored if things are the same, and need to try something new. And also sometimes when you move from institution to institutions, it's easier to take a leadership position in a place where you don't have previous history. So you don't have friends or enemies or other agendas that you have to, you know, you're sort of a new person in a fresh place. But I think the main reason to figure out whether you're going to move or not move is, what is it you're seeking? Can you do it in the same place, or is it only available someplace else, or is the environment better? Always be clear about why you might choose to take that action, either to move or to not move. And again, I always wanted adventures. I like sort of new challenges. For me, steady state is kind of the danger zone. I tend to get bored when there's not more building to do and maintaining. That's not my strong suit.
That's great. Thank you. And I see we're close to our end time here, so I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Jones to close us out.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. And thank you to Dr. Taylor for sharing your experiences and passing on your wisdom to our community. And thank you to Sarah and Michelle for doing such a wonderful job moderating the discussion, and to Kelsey for moderating the chat. As this is our last event in the inaugural People's United Center for Women in Business, Women of Color Professional Development Series, I also wanted to thank all of the participants, supporters, and collaborators for helping to make the series such a success. Specifically, I wanted to thank Denisha Collins, Veronica Jacobs, and Tiana Palm for all of their hard work during the series. Thank you for helping us to open doors and build community. I'm already looking forward to next year. Thank you all for coming tonight and for sharing in a wonderful event.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Taylor.
Oh, you're all welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor.